At 0800 hours at 75 degrees north off the coast of Greenland, the USS Gerald R. Ford was thrown into chaos. The collision alarm echoed across the carrier as the Aegis combat system suddenly overloaded. Command screens went dark, then restarted one by one, covered in red system warnings. Satellite connection was gone. Link 16 had been cut. On the island, backup optical sensors turned into the icy fog and locked onto a massive heat signature moving fast just 40 kilometers away. A Zircon-class hypersonic anti-ship weapon was racing toward the carrier at sea level, moving at nearly Mach 9. With radar guidance compromised, the Phalanx defense cannons had no clear target to follow. Time remaining, 14 seconds. The $13 billion supercarrier, carrying nearly 5,000 sailors, had suddenly become a powerless giant in the freezing Arctic waters, waiting for a single strike that could change everything. This crisis unfolded during Operation Arctic Sentinel, a mission designed to break Russia's control over the GIUK gap and protect the vital Patufic radar station. But Washington had not expected Moscow to turn these international waters into a silent trap, using the Arctic itself as a shield for its hidden operation. Did the U.S. Navy still have a card left to play, or was this the moment Western plans in the Arctic began to collapse? The chain of events had started 12 hours earlier, when Pentagon surveillance satellites detected unusual Russian activity. A massive electronic barrier, believed to be connected to the Murmansk BN system, had been activated across the region. Military analysts suspected that its true purpose was to conceal a large-scale strategic weapons exercise taking place dangerously close to NATO territory, putting the early warning capabilities of the Patufic station under direct pressure. Carrier Strike Group 12, led by the USS Gerald R. Ford, was ordered to move in and disrupt the barrier. U.S. destroyers switched their AN/SLQ-32V7 systems into passive triangulation mode, quietly tracking Russian signals without revealing their own position. But the Northern Fleet appeared to be one step ahead. The moment the American carrier group entered the waters near Greenland, Russia's aerospace forces activated the Perisfit ground-based laser system from the Kola Peninsula. A focused high-energy beam was sent into orbit, interfering with USKH-11 optical reconnaissance satellites as they passed over the area. At the same time, next-generation Murmansk BN electronic warfare units, hidden on autonomous ice stations around the fleet, began pushing powerful radio waves into the ionosphere. A geomagnetic storm made the effect even stronger. The charged atmosphere became a giant reflective shield, bending American radar signals and scattering them back toward the ocean from thousands of angles. Within seconds, the Aegis system was overwhelmed by false data. On the screens, U.S. officers saw 5,008 phantom targets, closing in at Mach 10 from every direction. GPS became unstable. Communication channels dissolved into heavy static. And somewhere inside that storm of false signals, one real threat was still coming. Russia did not stop there. It also launched a cyber warfare strike through floating hydrophone networks, slipping into the U.S. fleet's wireless logistics system and crippling the automated ammunition coordination process. In less than a minute, the entire carrier group was cut off, trapped inside a dense electronic web. The situation was hanging by a thread. If you think the U.S. could still recover, comment yes below. Unwilling to remain defenseless, the American commander ordered an immediate launch under MCON Alpha. EA-18 G Growler electronic warfare aircraft were hurled off the deck into the dark Arctic sky at full power. Their mission was clear: locate the source of the jamming and shut it down. The Growler crews switched on the AN/ALQ-218 passive signal detection system and flew in a wide formation at extremely low altitude, only about 30 meters above the sea. Using the curvature of the Earth and the chaos of the waves to mask their radar signature, they moved silently through the darkness. Onboard computers quickly began triangulating the powerful transmissions being projected into the ionosphere. In just 45 seconds, the passive sensors identified the positions of 3 main Murmansk BN signal stations. They were not on land at all. Instead, they had been hidden on massive drifting icebergs about 80 nautical miles from the fleet. The Growler squadron leader responded immediately. 8 AGM-88G AARGM-ER anti-radiation missiles launched in rapid succession, slicing through the Arctic night at high speed. Seconds later, 3 towering fireballs erupted on the horizon as the Russian transmission arrays were ripped apart. The effect was immediate. The false reflection field collapsed. On the Aegis display, more than 5,000 phantom contacts disappeared, leaving behind a clear tactical picture. Internal communications came back online. The U.S. fleet had finally broken through the electronic wall and regained situational awareness. But there was a catch. The instant those American missiles struck their targets, they also triggered the Northern Fleet's second and far more dangerous trap. The heat trail from the outgoing missiles had already been picked up by the OLS-50 sensors of a waiting Su-57 Felon stealth fighter group holding position between 8,000 and 18,000 meters. Russian pilots moved at once, launching R-37M long-range air-to-air missiles toward the E-2D Hawkeye operating behind the American formation. If the Hawkeye went down, the fleet would lose its ability to coordinate long-range air operations. What made the attack even more dangerous was the guidance method. Russia relied on passive mid-course infrared tracking, which meant American radar warning receivers stayed completely silent until the missiles switched to active radar guidance in the final moments. By then, reaction time was almost gone. The danger was not limited to the Hawkeye. To shield the Growlers, the U.S. had sent in F-35C fighters supported by XQ-58 Valkyrie drones. Russia countered with IL-22PP Porubchik electronic warfare aircraft, which released high-power microwave pulses aimed directly at the data link. The attack generated a concentrated energy surge that overloaded the transceivers and severely disrupted the Valkyrie's onboard processing. Then the situation turned even more chaotic. The IFF system, identification friend or foe, was effectively reversed, causing the drones to flag the leading F-35Cs as hostile aircraft. In an instant, the Valkyries locked onto the very fighters they were supposed to protect and began opening their weapon bays. The F-35C pilots had only a split second to respond. They immediately severed the compromised drones from the network, cutting off the launch sequence before it could happen. Their quick reaction prevented disaster, but the damage was already done. The American defensive formation had been thrown into disarray. Russia wasted no time. Su-57 fighters dropped from above like hunters, targeting the now scattered American aircraft one by one. And just as the air battle intensified, a new threat emerged from the sea. Around the U.S. fleet, the water suddenly seemed to come alive. Through the thick Arctic fog, dozens of strange objects sliced across the surface and rushed toward the formation. The AN/S PS-73 surface radar on the escort ships scanned the area, but the returns were distorted, blurred by interference and the clutter of drifting ice. The objects cutting through the Arctic fog were Russian Morena M unmanned surface vessels. Unlike standard one-way attack boats, the Morena M had been built as a semi-submersible platform, leaving only a small communication antenna and compact optical sensors above the waterline. From a distance, those sensors were barely larger than a soda bottle. Its composite hull was coated with radar-absorbing material, and as it moved between waves nearly 4 meters high, it became extremely difficult for electronic surveillance systems to track. The U.S. fleet reacted immediately, bringing one of its most advanced defensive systems into action aboard a leading Arleigh Burke-class Flight 2A destroyer, the 60-kilowatt Helios high-energy laser. In theory, this was the perfect answer. A laser beam travels at the speed of light and should be able to burn through the optical sensors of incoming unmanned vessels with pinpoint accuracy. The rotating laser turret locked onto the approaching Morena M units, which were closing in at nearly 50 knots, and began projecting invisible streams of energy through the frozen air. But Russia had chosen the timing carefully. A thick layer of freezing fog hung over the ocean, filled with suspended water crystals. It became a natural shield. As the laser passed through the fog, the Tyndall effect scattered the beam, draining most of its energy before it could reach the target. Nearly 90% of the laser's power was lost in the Arctic haze. America's futuristic weapon had run into one of the simplest forces on Earth, the physics of the environment itself. Realizing the laser system was no longer effective, American crews switched to conventional defense. The destroyer's 127mm and 25mm guns opened up at close range, filling the dark sea with rapid fire. Most of the incoming vessels were stopped before reaching the formation. But one Morena M slipped through the barrage. It disappeared beneath the waves and surged toward the stern of the escort destroyer. The charge detonated at the waterline. The blast did not sink the 9,000-ton warship, but the shockwave tore through the towed array cable and disabled the AN/SQR-20 multifunction sonar system. In a single moment, the fleet lost one of its most important tools for detecting underwater threats. A dangerous gap had opened beneath the surface, and that was exactly the moment the Northern Fleet had been waiting for. The loss of the Arleigh Burke's towed sonar array became the signal for Russia's submarine force to move. The true threat was no longer above the waves. It was rising silently from below, the Yasen M-class attack submarine K-571 Krasnoyarsk. Its objective was to neutralize the final underwater shield protecting the carrier group, the Virginia Block 5 class attack submarine USS Colorado, which had been operating below the surface as an escort for the USS Gerald R. Ford. Russia launched 4 MG-74M acoustic decoys from the submarine. Each decoy separated from the main vessel and began imitating the sound profile of an active submarine, including propeller noise and the acoustic signature of a large torpedo tube opening. Within seconds, the USS Colorado's passive sonar system registered 4 separate contacts surrounding it and appearing ready to fire. The American captain had almost no time to verify which targets were real. Under extreme pressure, he ordered the launch of Mark 48 AD-cap torpedoes in self-defense. But that decision created a clear acoustic signature, revealing the Colorado's exact position. The Krasnoyarsk remained hidden in the sonar baffle zone, moving quietly outside the strongest detection arc. From that position, it launched a UET-1 ichthyosaur electric torpedo, designed for quiet approach and minimal warning. The American submarine detected the incoming threat only when it was roughly 2 kilometers away. The USS Colorado immediately cut loose its decoys and began an emergency dive toward the edge of its safe operating depth. It narrowly avoided the strike, but the maneuver forced it out of position. On the surface, the USS Gerald R. Ford had just lost its final underwater layer of protection. The path was open. The Russian hunters now turned their attention to the largest target in the formation. From the Yasen M submarine, 2 Zircon hypersonic missiles launched vertically from beneath the sea, breaking through the surface and accelerating toward Mach 9 almost instantly. This was a carefully calculated all-or-nothing move by the Northern Fleet. Russia understood that the plasma field around the missiles would generate intense heat, making their position visible to American infrared sensors. But the gamble was simple. At nearly 3 kilometers per second, the Zircon missiles might reach the carrier before the U.S. defense network could react. But the U.S. Navy had already prepared for that exact scenario. The moment the plasma layer disrupted Aegis radar tracking, the IRST system switched automatically into passive mode. Within seconds, it locked onto 2 blazing heat signatures racing toward the fleet. This time, the American response did not begin with guns or missiles. It began with light. The 60-kilowatt Helios laser turret on the escort destroyer fired an invisible beam directly into the front section of the incoming missile. The beam was not powerful enough to melt through the missile's heat-resistant body, but it did not need to. Its real purpose was to overwhelm the optical guidance sensor during the final approach. For a split second, the Zircon's guidance system lost clarity. That was all the fleet needed. At the same moment, U.S. ships launched Mark 53 Nolka active decoys. The 2 hypersonic missiles, still moving at extreme speed, were pulled toward the false electronic signatures created by the decoys. Their guidance systems, already disrupted, could no longer correct the flight path. Both missiles veered away from the carrier, lost stability, and plunged into the sea roughly 2 kilometers from the USS Gerald R. Ford. Russia's speed-based gamble had failed against America's layered defense network. Beneath the surface, the USS Colorado was not finished. After diving to avoid the earlier torpedo threat, the American submarine quietly returned to the fight. Its captain used a drift tactic, shutting down the engines and allowing the submarine to move silently into the blind zone behind the Russian vessel. The crew then confirmed the target using magnetic anomaly detection. The order was given. A Mark 48 Mod 7 AD-cap torpedo left the tube and moved toward the Russian submarine in wake-homing mode. It detonated near the propeller section of the Yasen M, damaging the drive shaft and disabling the rudder. The Russian submarine suffered a propulsion failure, losing its ability to maneuver effectively underwater. Then the situation became critical. Its buoyancy control system was compromised, and the submarine began dropping deeper into the cold Arctic waters. To protect the crew from extreme pressure, the Russian captain had only one option: an emergency ballast blow. Moments later, the Yasen M surfaced, powerless and exposed, directly within range of the U.S. fleet. As the first light of Arctic dawn broke over the ocean, the scene was devastating for Moscow. The Russian attack submarine was floating on the surface, unable to dive and unable to continue the engagement. Both sides had taken serious losses, and pushing the battle any further risked triggering a level of escalation no commander wanted to cross. In the sky, the situation had also turned against Russia. With ground radar stations knocked offline, A-100 early warning aircraft jammed, and fuel running low, the Su-57 squadron found itself surrounded by 12 American F-35Cs locking on from multiple directions. The Russian squadron leader had no path left. To avoid further losses, he rocked his wings in a recognized surrender signal and requested permission to leave the airspace under escort. Farther away, the icebreakers carrying the Murmansk BN systems were already retreating toward Russian territorial waters, trying to escape before the U.S. fleet could respond. Operation Arctic Sentinel had succeeded. The United States had protected the Pituffik radar station, broken through the electronic barrier, and recovered valuable data on Zircon guidance frequencies and Yasin-M acoustic signatures. That brings us to the end of this episode. In your opinion, will Russia accept this setback, or will Moscow respond with an even more dangerous strategic move? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so you do not miss the next analysis.